People don't give a about what happened to you. I lost $80 million in 6 weeks. We have chronic anxiety. I mean, people are terrified of being judged. This is why you see so many of these people depressed, anxious. The mind can't tell the difference between truth and not truth, depending on how you were born, who you were born, benefiting top 1% of people.
This whole thing being a very selfish, self-interested narrative about what I deserve and what I achieve.
Maybe for a sociopath or a Donald Trump, if you question what high school students want to be, over 75% want to be an influencer, want to be a millionaire, want to be a celebrity, or a professional athlete. There's a subset of people who have obtained these things, wealth, power, position, yet they're still empty. And that's what people don't believe. The universe doesn't give a fuck about you. And the reason is...
First up, thank you for being here. Very psyched to have you on the show, and thank you for making the time.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, there is so much that fascinates me about you and your journey, which we will dive into in this conversation. And I honestly love how you have combined the science with the quote unquote woo woo, because I really feel that, manifestation is very misunderstood as a concept, right? Because of mainstream narratives and The Secret and whatnot. So, like, where do you think, what do you think we have got wrong about it, our understanding of manifestation?
Well, I think there are a couple problems. Now, of course, manifestation, and obviously we're referring to my new book, Mind Magic, and I go through the history, and actually, if you will, the concept goes back thousands and thousands of years. The challenge has been that with the Hermetics back in the first and second century, they had this, they came up with this, if you will, the law of attraction. What I think it's something, what someone puts out in the universe comes back. And then this got translated in, if you have positive energy, the universe responds, and then you get whatever you want. And then this, of course, had an impact on what we call the New Thought movement, which is, of course, Napoleon Hill and
Sure.
who's the other fellow? And then Norman Vincent Peale. And then this was next catapulted with The Secret. And there are a couple problems. Obviously, like many things, and I would even suggest religion, experientially over a long period of time, there are certain principles that have repeatedly been learned by humans without any scientific basis. And then typically, if you want to call it woo-woo, pseudoscience, or untruth is wrapped around it, associated with perhaps the culture or the environment at that time. And then people take that as truth. And one of the problems with the law of attraction and The Secret, I should say more than one, but one of them is that in some ways, the narrative can get punitive in the sense that, oh, you asked for it, you didn't get it, therefore you were the problem. You didn't want it enough, or you did something wrong, or the universe has decided, it looked at you, and you don't deserve this. So one is there's this idea that somehow you're to blame. The other aspect is and this is really, I think, the problem mostly with The Secret, which is a self-serving narrative. And what I mean by that is in Western capitalist society, there is this narrative that success equals happiness. Success, defined by our society, relates to money, power, and position.
Status, yeah.
And of course, these are very selfish, self-serving narratives with the fundamental agenda, I want, I deserve, I should have. And the problem with that is it's very misleading, and for many people leads to a complete dead end. Because making statements like, I want to visualize I'm a millionaire, I want to live in a mansion, fundamentally, these wishes come out of insecurity, fear about being judged. And in the Western capitalist narrative, if you have these things, then you get this external affirmation that tell you, I'm okay. Of course, the reality is, and I think you and more and more people realize, that if your focus is on such things, there is never enough external affirmation that will make you feel okay about yourself. The other aspect is that the reality is people have much, much more power within themselves than the universe. And as you know, the first sentence of the book says the universe doesn't give a fuck about you. And the reason is because it doesn't. There is no being or some magic out there that gives you everything you want because you want it. The problem with so many people today, though, is they give their self-agency away or their own internal power because of the belief that there is something outside themselves that will make them whole or feel good about themselves. And so one is people allow others or the universe to decide their fate. Two, they don't understand the power they have within themselves, their mind, to actually control their fate. And three, they're under the mistaken notion that if you focus on selfish goals, that is going to make you feel whole and fill the emptiness that so many of us have in this world.
Very interesting, and thank you for that background. A couple of follow up questions. So, let me start with this whole thing being a very selfish, self interested narrative about what I deserve and what I achieve. If I were to play devil's advocate, on the flip side, isn't life also like a single player game? Like you come alone, you die alone. It's about what you achieve for your own life in a way? Or is that selfish?
No, well, I think that's selfish. I think you're not alone and you shouldn't die alone. And if you do, you failed.
No, I mean, connection,
As
of course, I'm with you on that. But on the larger philosophical scheme of things, like it is a single player game in a way, or you don't agree with that?
No, not at all. I would never look at the world through that lens. It's just
Interesting.
not. Look, as an example, if you look at our evolution as a species, we're one of the few species. We have a very small litter size, one typically. Our offspring don't run off into the jungle or run off into the forest. And we have to care for them. And the requirement is that's at least a decade or two, which is an immense amount of time and resources. And so as a result, we have a genetic imperative to care and
Hmm.
connect and relieve the suffering of others. If our offspring are hungry or have hurt themselves, are in need, when we care for them, we have the release of neurotransmitters such as oxytocin, which stimulate our reward and pleasure centers. And also, when we are in that state, our physiology works its best. And whether that's your cardiac function, whether it's your immune system, et cetera, et cetera. The problem in modern society is that unlike, when we were on the savannah in Africa, if there was a threat, it was not that common. It wasn't 24/7. And let's say you saw the grass move, you knew from experience that represented a predator, then this would kick in your sympathetic nervous system or your flight, fight, or freeze response, which would have effects not only on your brain in terms of cutting down or diminishing your executive control function, because it needs to have an immediate plan, a singular plan, not have all these thoughts about,
Hmm.
well, if this happened, if that happened, I may do this, I may do that. You need to survive, right? But it also conversely has an effect on your peripheral physiology. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure increases, blood is diverted from your gastrointestinal tract to your skeletal muscle. You have the release of epinephrine, norepinephrine. your pupils dilate, and you act, and hopefully you survive. But then you immediately come down to your normal state, which is engagement of your parasympathetic nervous system, which has all these attributes associated with it, which are primarily associated with caregiving and bonding and connection. And that's how we evolved as a species. And if you look at the work of Bob Buettner and the Blue Zones, or you look at the Harvard longevity
Yes, the
happiness
people.
study,
Yeah.
right? It's all about social connection or depth of relationships. Okay, it's not about me, I want, and I die alone. Right? Okay.
I mean, you're right, because fulfillment in life depends or comes from meaning and both contributions. So how much you give back
Yeah.
and how much, it elevates your happiness levels.
Of course. So when you sit there and say it's a one-player game, it's not a one-player game at all, I don't think. And so so that is the reality of how we evolved. So we should be in that state most of the time. The problem is modern society has resulted in a huge deviation from how we evolved as a species.
True.
And of course, as you know, then for evolution to occur, which changes our genetic makeup, that requires millions of years, but modern society evolves very, very rapidly over thousands of years, and that's what's happened. So we are in a situation where most people in society are constantly stimulating their sympathetic nervous system. And the reason is because of insecurity and fear. You have to have a job, you have to show up, you have to feed yourself, you have to have housing. And the other aspect is that we are not in situations where we live in a small village where we were born, where we die, where we have a community who are interested in our human thriving and who watch out for us. Or nor do we have multi-generational families to rely upon. So in addition to the negative aspects of modern society, we are also in a situation we have chronic anxiety because we don't have a support system. I mean, people are terrified of being judged, right? And so because of that, and this Western capitalist narrative, which is basically we have to ever enlarge our economy, and that requires us to spend things, and that requires conspicuous consumption. There's a horrible situation that has occurred where there's a subset of people who have obtained these things, wealth, power, position, yet they're still empty. So what do? Is they promote that they have all of this stuff. Look at me. And this is the problem with influencers.
So ego-driven.
Exactly.
The
and
whole
so
thing has
if
become
you ask,
yeah,
it's horrible. And if you look at, as an example, if you question what high school students want to be, over 75% want to be an influencer, want to be a millionaire, want to be a celebrity, or a professional athlete, right?
Sure.
And these are all very self-serving. The likelihood of them achieving them is low, unfortunately, although they don't believe that. Then you have a group of influencers out there who are trying to present a narrative of perfection, and they're using filters, they're using makeup, they may use plastic surgery, and they sit there and say, hey, look at me, I have everything, I'm happy. Well, they're not happy at all. In fact, they're miserable, and they know they're miserable because without the filters, without the makeup, they are an average person. And an average person suffers and lives in the real world. And the problem is, this is why you see so many of these people depressed, anxious, and some commit suicide. Conversely, you have a group of insecure people who watch these people and believe what they're telling them, which only reinforces their own feelings of inadequacy, increases their fear and insecurity, and then they get depressed. So it's a horrible, horrible cycle. And so in some ways, and you mentioned meaning and purpose, so what we're looking at here, if you will, is do you choose fear or do you choose love, right? And love isn't a single person game.
Absolutely.
Maybe
I have to agree with that.
Yeah, maybe for a sociopath or a Donald Trump or a narcissist, right? Okay.
True. Just saying
So,
as it is, putting it out there, of course. Yeah.
so here's your narrative. One is what we call hedonic happiness, right? And this is a desire to maximize pleasure,
Dopamine
decrease
thrills.
pain. Yeah, but it all relates to things
Yeah.
or something you've done or to impress people. And of course, this was the track I was on. And if you look at my first book, Into the Magic Shop, I talk about my own personal narrative. But I had a woman teach me not only mindfulness or meditation practice, but a manifestation or visualization practice. But I was too young and without wisdom, and I was poor. So my narrative of what I wanted related to things, right? I wanted to be a doctor, and it wasn't so much about helping people, although that was part of it. It was, I'm a doctor, I'm important, right? Society will look at me. The other was, I wanted to live in a mansion, so people would see my mansion, that I was in the mansion. I wanted $1 million, which was a lot of money, 50 years ago. And I wanted a Rolex watch and I wanted a Porsche. Well, what are these things? They're just things. But for me, they identified me as being important and worthy. And so my life was spent doing these things, acquiring these things, chasing these things, because I was seeking external affirmation because I thought that would make me whole. And of course, as you well know, you'll stand at the top of the mountain and you'll get the external affirmation because you accomplished something or you have something that people believe they want. Yet it does absolutely nothing to fill the emptiness you have. And the emptiness is a manifestation of all of our insecurity, our shadow selves, our failings, our desire to want to be wanted or to feel worthy. And the problem is, though, that gift, if you will, is one you can only give yourself. It doesn't come from external affirmation. And the sad part is so many people keep chasing this. And this compares, if you will, to eudaimonic happiness. And the difference is hedonism or seeking self-pleasure is a dead end because you're never satisfied, versus seeking purpose and meaning does satisfy. So on the one hand, hedonism is shallow and transitory. Chasing eudaimonic happiness is deep and prolonged. But eudaimonic happiness relates to a different narrative. It's not an internally driven narrative about what I want. It's an externally driven narrative is how can I be of service? How can I help people? How can I inspire people? How can I motivate people? How do I care for people? And that comes only from, again, truly being of service. It doesn't come from things. Now, every time I say this, there's always a person who sits there. Well, there are two things they say. One is, well, geez, Dr. Doty, you had all of these things, and I just like to try it to decide I don't like them.
I know.
And the other is, well, you're putting down materialism. And I'm not at all. But I recognize what materialism is, or the acquisition of things. They are wonderful. Listen, I live in a very nice house. I drive a Porsche. I have a Range Rover. I have a Mercedes. I have all of those things. But they don't define who I am. And if they're gone tomorrow, it's perfectly fine.
That's what I
I have
find
completely,
fascinating. Like,
yeah.
honestly, because the hardest thing for humans is detachment. And the fact that you seamlessly did this is just wow. Like, how did you learn to do that? Detaching from all that you managed to achieve in your lifetime and just be like, you know what, it's gone. Couldn't care less. That does not come
Well, I
easy.
wouldn't say I couldn't care less, but it doesn't matter because fundamentally, whether it's there or not, I am who I am. I've had a great life. I have
Wow.
thoroughly enjoyed every one of those things. And if it's all gone tomorrow, I'm still completely content and happy because those things are irrelevant. They come, they go, and you can't be attached to them. What you can't replace, though, you can't replace relationships. You can't replace people. Again, it's not a single sum game here. So this is the difference. So the people who fundamentally chase materialism or want things, the problem is, though, for many of those people, taking away those things destroys their identity and who they perceive themselves as being. And that's really the key here. There's nothing wrong with these things. They're great. Now, did I get that insight in one day? No, right? I went through life chasing these things, and I got all of those things. But at the end of the day, I was, here I had a mansion overlooking the bay in Newport Beach, or
Beautiful.
Newport Bay in Southern California. It was absolutely beautiful, multi-story, huge, blah, blah, blah. I had a Ferrari, a Porsche, a Range Rover, Mercedes, a
But you still have
BMW
that,
in the
you
garage.
said.
Well, I only have 3 of the 5, but
Okay. Go ahead.
but I had all of these things. I had a villa in Florence. I had a penthouse in San Francisco. I was flying around in private jets. I was single at the time. I was dating all of these beautiful women. And my friends told me how great my life was. In fact, there was a very prominent restaurant, actually owned by Kevin Costner's wife, where all the cool people went to Newport Beach. And I used to have my own private table. I would pull up in my Ferrari and park it. It was yellow.
Can
and
I ask
park
what you
it
were
in
doing at the
front.
time, work-wise? Were you a doctor or something else?
Yeah, I was a neurosurgeon.
Wow. Jesus. Okay. God.
I was a very successful neurosurgeon.
Damn. Yeah, clearly.
But the problem was I was never more unhappy than I ever was in my entire life, because none of it filled it. I had everything, yet I had nothing. And
Wow.
and I didn't understand it, actually. And what got my attention was when I was in my early 40s, I lost $80 million in 6 weeks, and during the dot-com crisis, and effectively was minus $3 million. And obviously, this does get your attention. So my banker called me because I had borrowed $15 million and now I had 0 assets. My lawyer called me because obviously there was a lot of legal stuff that had to be done. But one of the aspects was I had donated a bunch of stock at a company that had yet to go public to charity. And during our discussions, he informed me that actually they had not filed the paperwork and that I did not have to give that stock away at all.
Ooh.
And I went through this period of reflection because fundamentally I went from rags to riches and to rags. Now, when I say I went to rags, like the second round, I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me because I was a prominent neurosurgeon and was running a biomedical company and was, from a financial perspective, doing fine. I was not going to starve, nor was I going to live in the street. But what happened was, though, I realized that the path I had been on was all about me, right? I'm this, I have this. And through this period of reflection, I realized that I was unhappy. And then I understood why I was unhappy, because every action I took was about me. And so in these conversations with the banker and the attorneys, one is obviously I had to pay the banker back. So I had to sell everything. Wow. And again, after selling everything, pretty much, I was $3 million in the hole. And then I decided to go ahead and have the attorney give all of that stock to charity. And that turned out to be $30 million. But what did that do? It actually was profound. One, here I ended up setting up health clinics around the world and blood banks. I set up programs for the disabled. I created a program for adolescents affected by AIDS, HIV. I set up research projects at different universities. I endowed chairs at different universities.
Amazing.
And I was able to start the center at Stanford that studies the neuroscience of compassion, empathy, and altruism. And through that, the Dalai Lama became the founding benefactor. He and I became friends. I became the chairman of the Dalai Lama Foundation.
Amazing.
Yeah, this allowed me then to become friends with many of the major spiritual and religious leaders in the world: Archbishop Tutu, Thich Nhat Hanh, Eckhart Tolle, Byron Katie, Sri Sri Ravi Shankar,
Mm.
Sadhguru, Sri M,
Wow, a whole lot.
Chidanand, um, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the fundamental nature of connecting with those people and changing from a self absorbed perspective to one of looking through the lens of oneness and connection actually filled my plate with riches, but a different kind. And so, in part, I mean, my mission is to promote this narrative and the power of compassion to not only help yourself, but to help others. And as the Dalai Lama says, if you wish to be happy, be compassionate
Yeah,
to others. If you want to be happy, be compassionate to others, right?
I
And
love that.
so nothing can be more fulfilling than the path that I'm on. I feel extraordinarily blessed, and it's one that doesn't require any money or things to have a deep sense of contentment and happiness. And fundamentally, that's what this book is about: to
Mm.
differentiate, one, the difference between a self-oriented perspective and narrative versus one which you have a broader perspective of your responsibility to be of service to others.
Very interesting. Love that story. Thank you for sharing. And so, from what I'm hearing you say so far, like we are still manifesting stuff in today's world, but probably not like stuff that serves us.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I think it's because of Western capitalism, frankly, which has now evolved into ruthless
Yeah,
extractive capitalism, which actually is causing a immense amount of misery throughout the world and is benefiting the top 1% of people in the world because they manipulate the system for their own benefit. And we
right.
can go into that discussion if you
Yeah,
want, but we don't
of
have
course.
to.
And also, like, mostly, usually people correlate manifesting with, attracting or thinking or visualizing, but isn't it more like a being state? Like we actually being what you want to attract?
Well, I think that's a part of it. So let me go over a couple aspects just to add a little bit of clarity.
Hmm.
One, all of us are manifesting all the time.
Good and
Uh,
bad stuff, sure. Yeah.
sure. And what many people don't appreciate is that what they're manifesting, uh, oftentimes they have no knowledge or appreciation of it. And the reason I say that is if you look at an individual's childhood, many events occur that create or embed patterns of behavior
Mm.
for good and for bad. And this is why you'll see people who will sit there and say, geez, I don't understand what happened here. I'm going through my third divorce and it's this exact same person I married the first two times. Why does that keep happening? Right? Because they have
Yeah.
patterns that are associated with bonding and caring that have been screwed up because of different interactions with family members, parents, etc. And these things get embedded, and then they carry this baggage of insecurity or fear with them, and then that impacts every action, every relationship, every decision they make. So one is these embedded patterns of behavior often are very negative, but if you're not aware of them, it's like you're a goldfish swimming in a dirty fishbowl, right? If all you're surrounded by is that negative patterns, then you don't understand that there are other patterns of behavior. So one of the first things you have to do is to sit back with pad and paper and try to figure out how you got where you are today to give you some insight and self-awareness.
Right.
The other thing is what people don't realize is that the creation of patterns or habit uh, have to be done slowly over time, and it takes work. And what I mean by that is no one who wishes to be an elite athlete starts out from day one as an elite athlete, right?
True.
So you have to start out slow, and you have to understand how to embed the behaviors, and we can talk about that, to allow you to be that next person you want to be. But it doesn't start out where, okay, today I want to be this or I want that. And geez, it should be here by the end of the day. It doesn't work like that. You have to create these patterns of behavior, and it takes repetition and intention. And this actually relates back to the classic narrative of manifestation. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is truth, just like there's truth in every religion. But most religions have so much dogma around them, oftentimes you can't see the underlying truth. So yes, through repetition and intention. As an example, practices such as utilizing all of your senses to embed an intention.
Sure.
And that would be making a list, writing it down, reading it silently, reading it aloud, visualizing it, where you're using all of your senses to embed it. And that process
And taking
is
inspired
called,
action, I'm assuming.
yes, but that, yeah, and that happens. But what I was going to say is this is a pattern of value tagging to go into your subconscious. Okay.
Value tagging. I love that
So
word. Yeah, I've heard about this
yeah,
too.
so what happens is that through our sensory organs, which is how we interact with the world, we get about 6 to 10 million bits of information a second. 99.999% of that goes to maintaining body homeostasis or functions.
Yeah.
On a conscious level, though, we're only able to process about 50 to 100 bits of information a second. So it's imperative that you define your intention, and then you embed that, and that's through those practices. Once it gets embedded into your subconscious, several things happen. One, it activates what we call your default mode network, which occurs when you're daydreaming, when your mind wanders. It's very self-referential. It's how you define yourself. It creates a narrative about who you are, what you want, or what you should have. Once something has been embedded, then it becomes salient. Okay? And once it becomes salient, it means it has meaning to you, and it gets embedded into your subconscious. Then the subconscious then focuses your attention, and there's something called the attention network, to be attuned to events around you that may relate to what you're trying to manifest. Once that attention is drawn to that, then this empowers your executive control network to actually actively respond. And I'll give you a couple examples of that. I'm sure you've been to parties where it's very loud. I can't imagine you actually party, but I'm just making.
Why? Why would you say that?
I'm just kidding. Anyway, but if you're at a party and it's very noisy, if someone says your name, even in the noise, you hear it, right?
Of course.
Yeah, because your identity is deeply embedded in you. And so as soon as you hear it, you turn to it. Or as an example, as a neurosurgeon, I may tell a patient that they maybe have a benign brain tumor, something called a meningioma. And they'll sit there and they'll go, I've never heard of that before. Yet, if I see them 2 months later, go, well, that's the most amazing thing. I've run into 6 people who say they've had meningiomas, right? Well, why is that? Because when they're actually fearful or anxious, they've embedded that into their subconscious, and they're attuned to it. Or another example, which I've given, is, there's a fairly esoteric project that I'm working on, and I was at a coffee shop, very noisy. Yet, among the din of all of that noise, I heard a couple of words that related to this project by 2 individuals in the far corner.
Your RAS got activated.
Yes, and I went over and interacted with them, and now we're working together on that project.
Love it.
And that is because, and I use the example of your subconscious being a bloodhound. So on a conscious level, you embed your intention, if you will, into a file cabinet. The bloodhound looks in the file cabinet and sees what's important. Then the bloodhound is working 24 hours a day to be attuned to what you're looking for. And so these examples I just give are actually the synchronicities or coincidences that occur based on the bloodhound being activated and seeing something that's salient related to your intention. And this is how the process works. And this is how you maximally increase the likelihood of your goals manifesting. Now, that's not to say, and as I've told you from my own example, that you can have the wrong intentions or you can be anxious or fearful and you make things manifest. But as you've seen from my example, oftentimes those actually are not the things you need to manifest. And the interesting thing about the subconscious, actually, many times, is that because it's always turned on, and on some level, because it's your subconscious, you do not necessarily have an immediate understanding of how it's acting.
Sure.
And there are certain situations that occur where you don't get what you want,
Right.
or it's not exactly what you want. But in many ways, it's because your subconscious understands the difference sometimes between what's good for you and what's not.
Absolutely. So you're a neurosurgeon, and from a neuroscientific perspective, are there any brains that have a higher predisposition to manifesting, or is more in the consciousness arena?
Well, I mean, it's like everybody. Everybody's different. As an example,
Mm.
you look at somebody like the Dalai Lama, and he may have been predisposed to being highly attuned to being kind and compassionate. And you could even use me as an example in some ways. Even with my own insecurities, I was always attuned to the suffering of other people. But you also
Empathic,
look
yeah.
at people like Wim Hof, right? The guy who
Mm.
runs up Mount Everest barefoot in shorts without a
Mm.
shirt, right? Or you look at Tibetan monks who can train their minds, and this is something we all have access to. And in many ways, that's the point of this. You can train your mind to overcome self-limiting beliefs, right? Because all of us have self-limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
And this is why people continually get into relationships that don't serve them. They have a limiting belief on a subconscious level that tells them they're not worthy, they don't deserve love, or it's not possible. And the reality is that once you tell yourself that, that becomes truth, right?
Mm.
If you say, I cannot run the race, I cannot win the marathon, I
Then you won't.
cannot, yeah, that is
So,
truth. The mind does not have the ability to discern truth from untruth, right?
so
Uh,
from a
Go ahead.
from a neuroscience perspective, we all have, like, there are no special brains. We all have the same capacities. It just comes down to who trains their brains better, right?
Well, no, we do have different capacities. Obviously, there are individuals who are extraordinarily smart and gifted, and there are people who are average or below average in terms of brain function. But fundamentally, the principles
Mm.
we're talking about can be used by almost anyone.
Anyone, yeah.
And also, you don't have to be brilliant to
Mhm.
manifest, right? One should not believe that there's something about them. The only thing that makes the decision is you. And that's what people don't believe. Oftentimes, there's not a magic in the universe or someone looking over you deciding you're worthy. You are the determinant. And that's why they say the only person that can make you happy is you. And this is self-compassion, self-acceptance, understanding fundamentally, no matter what your past, you deserve love. You deserve to achieve what is best for you. You just have to have clarity about what is best for you. And this is the problem sometimes, right? So on the one
Yeah.
hand, we talked about the baggage people carry and the limiting beliefs they have. But the other is you have to have clarity about your intention, right? If you sit there and say, I want the mansion and the cars, you may get all of that, But is that going to make you feel whole or take care of your own insecurities? And I will tell you from my experience and the experience of millions of people, it will not if you believe that that is you and that's going to make you whole. So one is clarity of intention. Now, I would suggest to you that if one looks through the lens of being of service to a larger vision or caring for others, you're more likely to manifest your intention, but you'll also understand that there is a difference actually once you start doing that between what your intention becomes. Because if you're being of service, you get ultimately all the other things,
Hmm.
or you choose the other things are not important, but
So it
that
does.
is extraordinarily fulfilling.
So it does come down to getting clear on what you want and perhaps even why you want it, because that sort of reminds you of, like, why is this important to me in the first place? Why do I
Yes.
want this so bad?
Yeah, and it gives you insight into your own insecurities and the drivers of your behavior.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's interesting, I mentioned this, that the mind can't tell the difference between truth and not truth. Actually, studies have been shown that if you think about exercising every day, you will actually increase your muscle mass.
Yeah.
Right.
I've heard
Now,
that. That's fascinating.
you're not going to become Arnold Schwarzenegger, but the point is your belief in yourself, the belief of your innate power can change your physiology, it can change your immune system,
Mm.
it can change the production of inflammatory proteins, which are associated with chronic disease states.
Hmm.
And so it has huge, huge power to improve your life. Now, I don't want to in any way imply, because some people say, well, if I just use my mind, can I cure my cancer? Is it possible? Potentially. Is it likely? No. But what I will say is if you use modern medicine and have a positive mental attitude, that will probably increase the likelihood of success of your treatment. And whether it's cancer or some other condition, we know one's mental state has a huge, huge
Yeah.
impact on how they respond. And in fact, if you look from a medical perspective, neurosurgery as an example, we know that when a patient sees you, they have a lot of fear and anxiety, which is the nature of going to the doctor, especially a neurosurgeon. If the if the physician makes the person feel they're listening, that they care, what happens? If then you look when they enter the hospital, their anxiety and fear is markedly diminished. This has a huge impact on how they respond to anesthetics. It
Hmm.
has a huge impact on how they heal. It has a huge impact on the amount of pain medication they need. It affects their length of stay in the hospital, and it
Wow. Yeah.
decreases their readmission rate to the hospital simply from being kind, being compassionate, being thoughtful, and understanding how the mind works.
That really is amazing. So you have done clinical trials in hospital to help people manifest better health?
Sure. I mean, there's
Wow.
a whole, now they don't use the term manifesting, but yeah, there's a body of literature that shows how a physician interacts with a patient
Man, I
has a
love that.
huge bearing on how they respond to treatment and interventions. In fact, there was a study that was done, and you're probably aware that there's unfortunately a subgroup of people who repeatedly present to the emergency room. Now, why do they present? Typically, they're in poverty.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, they'll have chronic disease states, probably as a result or related to. Many of them have issues related to drug and alcohol abuse. Interestingly, they did a project where they actually had a nurse simply sit down and talk to these people. And this decreased the uh, number of admissions to the hospital by
Wow.
50%.
Emotional
Simply by
support.
talking.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. And this is
Amazing.
why we talk about, you know, so many people are suffering. Oftentimes, especially in the modern world, somebody taking the time to simply sit and listen, empathic
Mm.
listening. Now, this isn't interrupt, because what happens a lot of times is somebody go, I had this situation, and this person did this to me, and then the person will interrupt and go, I had the same thing happen. People don't give a fuck about what happened to you. Right? They're interested in somebody silently nodding and say, I appreciate it. Geez, I know how hard that could be. Geez, I know you were suffering. Simply
Mm.
listening to people without interrupting, letting them say what they need to
Yeah,
say, has a huge, huge positive impact on dissipating stress,
100%.
anxiety. And so, again, it all relates to how our brain functions, the power we have within ourselves, the power of belief to have a huge impact on our bodies and our physiology and how we see the world. And so you made a statement earlier. Well, if you embody this yourself, can it, yes, by having the right mental state, like I'm not perfect. I am an imperfect individual, but I try to walk in the world with a narrative. How can I be of service? How can I make this person feel better?
Mm.
And that is always there. That's how I try to walk in the world. And if
Beautiful.
you do that, everything changes. Because, and
Absolutely.
I talk in the book about our oscillations or vibrations in our bodies. Believe it or not, our heart actually emanates a energy field 5 to 6 feet outside of ourselves. Now, this is not woo-woo, although it's certainly promoted oftentimes in that way. How you feel about yourself, how you view the world, actually has a potentially very powerful effect on everyone around you. And I'm sure you've been in situations where you may be in a meeting or with your boss, and if the boss walks in with this
Yeah.
energy emanating that says, listen, you guys are great. You guys have been working so hard. I just love how you're so motivated to work with me to
You'll
make this
expand.
company a
Yeah.
success. You sit there and go, God, I feel good. I'll do anything for this person. Versus if the guy walks in and says, look, you guys screwed up. Our sales numbers are down. You guys are idiots. You don't know what you're doing. We're going to have you do X, Y, or Z. You basically aren't happy.
Yeah, it does come down to energy, right? So all of Joe Dispenza's work, I suppose.
Well, yeah, of course, there are a lot of people. Now, there's some people, though, who, and this shouldn't be about how can I look at every person who is in need to be a profit center for me.
You have a problem with, I mean, yeah, it's commercialized, but at least you're still
Well,
helping people in the process, right? He's changing lives, even though it's a big industry
sure.
now.
Oh, yeah. Well,
So
look at
everything's,
Tony Robbins.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Now, and again, that style of behavior isn't how I function, but it does help a lot of people. In fact, a study was recently done that I was involved with, which looked at one of Tony Robbins's events, where they actually took blood samples and
Mm,
people wore Fitbits, and
okay.
it had a profound effect on feelings of anxiety, depression that lasted for months afterwards. And
Oh,
so now, getting up and clapping and saying, we're all great, that's not my thing, but for some people, it does resonate with them and it has a huge
yeah.
impact. But what he does, and what Joe Dispenza and other people do, is they promote a positive narrative about possibilities and uh, understanding how you limit your own beliefs and empowering you, or as I think Tony Robbins says, unleashing the power within. All of these things can be very, very positive. And, it's funny because I just made a critical comment, but, I was talking to the Dalai Lama one time and I said, you know, I mean, you have these people who are doing good, but, does it matter what their intention is? And what I meant by that was, as an example, is it bad to commercialize all of this for your self benefit so you can live in the mansion and drive the Ferrari or whatever, right? And he said, well, look, if somebody's doing good in the world, that's the
Mm,
most important thing. If they're
I
improving the
love
lives
that.
of other people,
Yeah.
but he said it does make a difference if you believe in karma.
Fair enough, Dalai Lama. Okay.
So
So the principles you outlined earlier that like what it takes to manifest, like writing down your goals, being super intentional, practicing action or whatever. Did you personally do this that led you to manifest the first half of your life of all the big goals and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh-huh.
And is your mind primed enough now to be at that state, or do you now still do some active practice to manifest what you want? Are you just being that way now, showing up in the
I would
world?
say I'm being that way. Now, you
Hmm.
could argue you'd probably be more successful if you actually wrote it down and did all the things over and over again.
You're so funny. I love that.
But
Yeah.
again, if you embed this within yourself, in some ways, you're always manifesting. That's
Yeah.
you're embedding these intentions. You're repeating them.
Mm.
So in some ways, you're doing that. But I think for most people, utilizing the techniques, and in the book, I go through a 6-step program.
Hmm.
I haven't started creating seminars where I charge people to attend yet. But yeah,
Yeah. I have a question for you, the doctor. So, how does one prime their mind to like think better and create when life is not working in their favor? Like when they're just struggling to make, ends meet and just in survival mode. How do you prime your mind
sure.
in those circumstances?
Well, first of all, I mean, I think there's one thing that I need to mention well, two. One is one of the challenges for many people is not having attachment to outcome, right?
Sure.
Attachment and craving is a recipe for suffering. And so, and the other thing is when you're so intent on manifesting a goal, like you'll see people who'll, I'm going to run here and do this, and I'm going to climb this mountain. Well, if they sacrifice every relationship and leave carnage behind them in terms of their families, children, financially, whatever, and they're at the top of the mountain by themselves, what really did they accomplish, right? So I think having a clarity about your goal and what you're trying to do, because what so many people forget is the power of these things oftentimes is the journey you're on with the people you're with who care about you.
Hmm.
It's not about a singular intention about you getting some award at the end. But
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, there are circumstances in the world. In fact, there are structural or systemic
Difficult.
barriers for many people. It's not as if you can live in a ghetto or in a trash dump and then say, I want to drive a Rolls Royce tomorrow. Now, is that possible? Absolutely. Is it likely? Probably not. But having a belief, and there's something in the book I call dispositional optimism.
Oh wow. Okay.
And, and I first read about this actually related to a prisoner who was in Vietnam, prisoner
Mm-hmm.
of war. And he spent like 6 or 7 years, being beaten every day in a cell, isolated. And he never knew what the future held, right? And if you put into your head, well, I want this to happen and it needs to happen in this time frame, you'd be chronically disappointed. But he had an imperturbable view that ultimately things would work out for the best.
So
And the
faith is a
very
big
nature,
factor here.
yeah, but fundamentally having that constant view actually makes your physiology work its best. You don't go into despair and hopelessness or rumination. If you
Wow.
believe that, yes, it's difficult now, it's challenging, but there is hope in the future. Now, again, I think that, yes, there are possibilities for everyone. But, if you're in an environment where, I mean, there's some countries where, regardless of what your hopes and aspirations are, depending on how you were born, who you were born to, or let's say what caste system, it may prevent a huge number of barriers for you to go beyond that. That being
Hmm.
said, there are innumerable examples of people from these backgrounds who, in fact, overcome these challenges. But the overcoming of those challenges does not necessarily have to relate to ruthless behavior where you crawl over people to get
Sure.
there. Because when you do that, and whether you want to believe it's karma or whether you want to
Yeah.
believe that these types of behaviors actually may allow you to reach your goal, but it's not going to allow you to be a whole, fulfilled human being.
Yeah, reminds me of Elizabeth Holmes, right? The whole Theranos case. Exactly her life. Like selfish goals, selfish individual, and look where she is now, rotting in prison.
Yes, and with her
So-
second child, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy
Uh,
how much she was blinded by her ego. I'm just shocked. I watched the show The Dropout. I'm just like
yes.
shocked to see. Anyway, crazy.
Yes, yeah. Well, and again, now the interesting thing about her, of course, is, which is a strange narrative, is she ended up hooking up with a very wealthy young man,
Yes.
and she will spend her 10 or 11 years in prison, but she will be pampered afterwards. But yeah, I mean, but the thing is, what kind of a human being is that? I mean, but there are a lot of those
Blind.
types of people,
Sure.
and it's a group of people who believe they don't have to go by the rules, that they're superior to other people, and that their self-interest um, is more important than those of everyone else. And there are tons of people in our society like that. It probably makes up about 9% of people, and that is frankly one of the reasons why uh, many aspects of our world are so fucked up.
Yeah, 100%. It's like the downside of extreme ambition where it's all about you and what you do in your life and your status.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Now, I have had people like that tell me I'm an idiot. Like,
They don't
Jim, you
know
need
any
to do
better.
this. Well, but it's interesting, right? From their perspective, I'm a fool. And, you
Well,
know,
who's happier, right? Who's more whole? We got to ask
well,
the question then. Exactly.
in their view, they'll sit there and say, well, look, I have my private table, and I can drive
Feeling-
any car I want. I date these beautiful women, and
yeah,
what could be
the ego
better than
trap.
that?
The
Yeah,
ego is
and
a dangerous thing. Yeah, if
yes,
untamed.
yes. And now I would say we talk about ego, but I would also mention that some of our enlightened spiritual leaders are still trapped by their ego as much as every
100%.
one of us.
I'm
And,
so glad you
I've
said that.
had the pleasure of interacting with some of those people. I had one hit me really hard one time because I asked him why he always hangs around with rich people. But
He hit you? What, for real? What? That's nuts.
well, it's not. He didn't hit me in the face.
That's like called
He,
spiritual bypassing, you know?
of course, of course. But
Yeah.
again, look, it takes a very special human being to have all this adoration from people and
Mm,
not to have it impact your ego.
it
I
does.
mean, it's almost impossible. And
Yeah.
so, I'm not the arbiter and the judge of anything, but I'm just saying that they're not immune to these things. And this is why you see many of the male spiritual leaders have sexual relations with acolytes who, because nothing's better for a believer than to have the guru come down and say, "You're so special, I'm
Yeah.
going to have a relationship with you, or I'm going to anoint you, or blah blah blah."
Exactly.
And again, it's ego driven on both sides. One out of desperation and fear, and the
Mm-hmm.
other out of power and self confidence and ego. But again, it's just the reality of our failings as human beings. And this is what also people should realize is all of us are frail, fragile human beings. It's just the reality. None of us
Yeah.
are perfect. We can try. You look, I am imperfect. I have fucked up. I will repeatedly fuck up. I try to minimize those fuck ups, but that is life.
Yeah,
And I
no
do the
shit.
best I can. And I am saddened sometimes when I fail, but that's just the way it is. But you still have to understand, even in the face of our fragility and our failings, we deserve to be loved, we deserve to be cared for, and we are worthy. And you should never, never believe that you're not worthy of love or that somehow
Yeah.
you're inferior to someone else. None of us are. And, in the first book, I actually ended up creating what I call the alphabet of the heart. And this was during a talk I gave to a group of incoming medical students. And what I did was I tried to summarize the lessons I had learned in a mnemonic that allowed them to remember these basic principles in terms of not only their lives as physicians, but as human beings. And it came down to 10 letters of the alphabet, or I call it the alphabet of the heart. And one is C, compassion for self and others. D, recognizing the dignity of every person, right? None of
Mm-hmm.
us are superior to anybody. E is practicing equanimity or evenness of temperament. Because what happens is it's wonderful to achieve and get all these external accolades, but those are transitory and they're
Sure.
going to go away. Versus, people try to avoid the downtimes or pain, which of course we all try to, but the reality is they're going to happen. But that is not necessarily bad in of itself. And what I mean by that is when you're in those situations, it is also transitory, but it's also the place where oftentimes you learn the greatest lessons and wisdom about living in this world. And in some
Yeah.
ways, it's often a gift if enough time has passed. So having this
Absolutely.
evenness of temperament and equanimity, where you
Mm.
understand these extremes, but you don't get attached or lost in them. F is forgiveness, because unfortunately we attach emotion to people and events, oftentimes negative, and
Mm.
every time we think of them, they cause our own suffering. They do nothing
Sure.
towards these other people.
Sure.
So being able to forgive and not necessarily forget is very, very important and powerful. G is having
Yeah.
gratitude. As you and I are talking, we know that half of the world's population live on under $2.50 a day. Well, we're blessed,
Very.
ecstatic, thankful, and appreciative. And when people, instead of thinking about what they don't have, they think about what they have compared to so many other people and write it down. It makes you
Mm.
appreciative, understand how blessed you are. H is having
Gosh.
humility, understanding you're no more important than anyone else. I is having a set of values or integrity that bound
Mm.
your behavior and how you see the world and how you act in the world. J is justice, or our responsibility to care for the vulnerable. Of course, there's kindness, not necessarily relating to someone's suffering, but just recognizing our responsibility to simply be nice to other
Yeah.
people, regardless. All of this contained by L, which is love.
Wow, gosh, such profound lessons in this conversation. Wow. Thank you, Dr. Doty, for the gift of you and for bringing such a holistic understanding of success and happiness and health, everything in life. So, thank you for being here with us today. And before I let you go, how would you describe an epic being?
An epic being is someone who focuses on other beings.
Love that. Perfectly summarized. And where would you like people to reach out to you or find you and discover more of your work? I know the book Mind Magic is out on Amazon, correct?
Yes, but I would also recommend, if they're going to buy it, they consider buying it from bookshop.org. And the reason I say
Sure.
that is a group of independent bookstores that work together, and it
Okay.
promotes the success of independent bookstores, which I think is
Perfect.
important. But certainly,
Perfect.
Amazon is also a
Yeah.
source. You can learn a little bit more about me at ccare.stanford.edu. That's ccare.stanford.edu. You can find me at my website, jamesrdoty, DOTYMD.com. And there's information about the book, the other book, the first book, the second book, some of the projects that I'm doing. Also, actually, there is a mental health app that I have been working on for some time that people actually can try and use for free at the moment to help them with stress and anxiety and depression and loneliness.
Wow.
It's called Happy, Happi. So AI is in the word happy, not Happy. Happy, Happi.ai. And actually, it's quite interesting because it has an emotion assessment engine. It has a proprietary a conversational AI knowledge base of compassion focused therapy and psychology, which is
Amazing.
connected to a human like avatar, which you can actually talk to. And I was
Ooh.
saying how talking to people can have a profound effect. And that even works, believe it or not, with an avatar. Because whether you want to or not, you can actually get an emotional connection to an avatar,
Yeah.
which is very powerful, unlike just typing on a chatbot into the universe where there's nobody. So it's quite powerful. And in fact, we call it a mental health companion. It's not therapy, but it has a profound effect on people. And it's not to separate them from the world to interact with an avatar. It's to give them strength and build them up so that they can go back to interact in the real world. And so I'm excited about that too. So those are all the different ways. I will give my email, which is jrdoty@stanford.edu. Now, I would say every time I do that, I literally get hundreds and hundreds of emails. I cannot answer every one of them. But
No AI for that. Yeah.
yeah, well, I should. Actually, it's so funny you mentioned that, because there is an individual who works at a very prominent tech company as a chief technology officer, but he likes my work, and he created a Doty magic AI. And what he did was he scoured everything about me, everything I've said, everything I've written,
Wow.
every paper, all those books, and created a Doty AI.
That's
Uh,
crazy.
yes, and in fact, there's soon to be an
I see.
avatar
Jim
with that.
Doty AI. I see on the website. I saw it. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So you can go there and ask it questions, and it's as if you're talking to me. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't use profanity as profusely as I do, uh, uh, and it's not quite my personality. But that being said, actually, my wife tells me she prefers to talk to it rather than me. So there you have it.
There we go. All righty. Absolute pleasure, Dr. Doty. Thank you so much for being here and sharing all your profound wisdom.
Well, thank you, and hopefully I'll visit you in Delhi. And
Please do.
yes, yes. So take care of yourself. Thank you, everyone, all the listeners. I appreciate it, and I wish each and every one of you the best. So take care.